Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Homily Chat. It's great to have you with us here on this Feast of the Transfiguration. It's August the 6th as we're recording this. I'm Father Darryl Millette here in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, up in extremely hot Canada. It is 32 degrees today. I don't know what that is for you. I think that's like 90 something, but it's hot here anyway. And then I think just south of San Francisco, Father Michael Liliedahl. Hello.
Yeah, just south of San Francisco and 32 degrees, 90 something. I have a friend that we consider that Slurpee weather. Basically, anytime the weather gets about 95 degrees, you know, where she lives or where I live, we get a Slurpee and we take a picture of it and we send each other a picture of ourselves having the Slurpee. I have to say I get the better end of that deal because I live in California and she lives in Portland, Oregon. So it doesn't quite get to 95 as often where she lives as it does where I am.
Well, I just did the math, and by doing that, I typed it into Google. 32 Celsius is 89.6 Fahrenheit. So we'll round that up. It's like 90. It's really hot. Really, really, really hot stuff.
That's getting up there. That's for sure. That's for sure. But we have some big news. So Father Darryl, who used to be just, and I say just as if this is something, a small thing. Father Darryl used to just be the pastor of a parish, but now he is the pastor of the parish, and a word that many people don't realize exists in the Catholic Church. They may not have even heard of this position. You are now the chancellor for your diocese.
Yes. Basically, I am ultimately responsible for record keeping and this kind of stuff at the diocesan level. Practically also responsible for a lot of the marriage permissions and dispensations and paperwork. And actually, to be honest, I'm still learning what all this entails. I have to admit, it kind of cracked me up. The number of texts that I got in short order were all they did was they sent me a picture of Palpatine from Star Wars. It cracked me up. I hope I'm not like that. Hope I'm not reminding you of Chancellor Palpatine. But anyway, yeah. So I've got another new job, and I will also be doing some part-time studies in canon law on top of that beginning this fall. So.
You know, I was on a Zoom call with some other priests for another group, and someone had made this point. They said, well, when you have an assignment that's technically, 50% here and 50% here, that means you're busy 200% of the time, because it's basically impossible to do any of these jobs 50%. And part-time studies in canon law, part-time chancellor of the diocese, part-time pastor of a parish, means you're busy 300% of the time. I mean, you essentially have what some people would consider 3 full-time jobs. And I remember another priest said, well, you better learn how to run meetings efficiently.
I don't know how many meetings I actually run as chancellor. I don't think a whole lot, at least in our diocese. I sit on, I'm ex officio on a number of things. I think I'm ex officio on, just basically a part of the Presbyteral Council and College of Consultors and stuff like that, I think. Mm-hmm. Like I say, I'm still figuring out what all this entails. So pray for me, eh? Yeah.
Father Darryl was talking beforehand. He was saying, no, I'm still trying to figure this out. And I said, oh, it's not like the president of the United States where they leave you, that nice letter on the desk as you go in, that even if it just says, good luck, we're rooting for you, your success is our success, no letter letting you know what you're supposed to do.
No. Now I have Leslie Nielsen in my head. Good luck. We're all counting on you.
Yeah, exactly.
Airplane reference there.
I'm trying to think. I think I've only really had interactions with our chancellor in 2 regards. One has been, as you said, marriage dispensations, and that's a huge topic. But essentially, marriage dispensations are a pretty regular thing these days. Especially if a Catholic is marrying a non-Catholic, a dispensation is required. It's not difficult to get. It's just a little bit of paperwork, but that paperwork has to have an official signature, which can come from Father Darryl's hand now. And the other way I have seen the chancellor, or at least of our diocese, is when I get my official letter of my assignment. It's signed by 2 people. It's signed by the Archbishop, and it's signed by the chancellor, letting me know, we have assigned you to here, and it lays out all of that kind of stuff. So
Yep.
other than that, I don't know what a chancellor does, so I'm glad I'm not that. And I hope you have more to do and than just signing papers that are put in front of you.
Yes, I think I also get to like create those letters. So, yeah.
Well, there you
So in the chat here, Claire just put congratulations, and then with an exclamation point, question mark, exclamation point. It's kind of cracking me up. A lot of people have been very kind, have said very kind congratulations. But then there's a number of people who are priests or who otherwise work in the church in some capacity, and they're all like, congratulations, I think.
Yeah. So Claire must work in the church. I'm sorry. You see me keep looking off to the side. I'm trying to get the comments to come up as I'm watching the video on my iPad, so I can't see the comments because I can't figure out how to get the comments. So I'm just going to try to ignore that right now. Focus on this and leave it up to Father Darryl to read the comments that come in that are interesting or strike his fancy.
Sounds good. Anyway, but no, thank you very much. Everyone's been very, very kind, and do pray for me and pray for this diocese. Interesting. It should be a very interesting time. So,
yeah. And if you can tell, I think I'm in the fourth different place I've recorded from. Although it is kind of similar because I have the bookcase behind me, but I am not in the school library. I am actually now in the guest room of our rectory. And if you know who my pastor is, don't tell this to him. But I'm trying to kind of take over the sitting room of the guest room right now to kind of make it my video chat office in a sense, because I also have a new job or a new responsibility that I have since last week, and it requires a lot more video chatting, at least at the beginning. So I'm going to be teaching a high school class at the high school that I'm a chaplain at. So for the first 6 weeks, at least, we are doing all distance learning. So it's essentially every class is done via Zoom. So I said, you know what, if I have to Zoom in for 3 or 4 classes a week with students, I think I need a little bit more permanent station for Zooming. And so I'm thinking about kind of taking this over because, let's kind of be honest, we don't really need a guest room right now. This isn't the time of history in which we're receiving a lot of guests.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, congratulations on that new job too. It is the season for new responsibilities. And by the way, if you can hear like little dog walking and shaking her collar and whatever, that's because there's a dog walking around here and shaking her collar and whatever. So if you hear anything weird, let's blame it on the dog. But no,
that's always what I do anyway. So
yeah, exactly. So it's a good thing we have this podcast now because basically it gives me a chance to really look at the readings and to start to formulate a bit of a homily in my mind. And they are incredible readings this weekend.
Yes, they are. And I was talking with Father Darryl, and I had to ask, do you want me to read the gospel? Because I'm actually probably, I say this right now, not going to preach about the gospel just because the first reading is one of my all-time favorite readings from all of Scripture, and it comes from the Old Testament. We'll get to that, when we get to that. But even the gospel itself, right? Just to give you a heads up, right? Jesus walking on water, Peter telling him, "Invite me." It always reminds me when I was a seminarian, we had to do what's called a pastoral year, which is where you go and live and work at a parish for a year as a seminarian to kind of get, to see. Well, parish life isn't quite exactly like seminary life, and so you can see what it's like. And the parish I was at was St. Peter's, and so we had this beautiful stained glass window of the scene from today's gospel. And I always spent a lot of time in prayer just looking at that stained glass window of Jesus extending his hand to Peter, and kind of praying and meditating on that. So it's always kind of touched me in a special way, this gospel reading.
That's awesome. Well, Jane's asking, are we hearing all the readings tonight?
Oh, if Father Darryl asks for the second reading, then we'll hear all the readings, but I'm not going to go into the second reading.
Well, we do have a link in the post, I believe, to the USCCB site with the readings, so you can read along.
And we actually may have to change that because the USCCB changed their website and changed it just a little bit. So if you have to go there, it's just a little bit different. But you can find them. They're still right there.
Yeah.
And so I think, speaking of it, why don't we head into the gospel? So I believe I am reading the gospel
Sounds
this
good.
week. So a reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, O
Glory
Lord.
to you, O Lord. After he had fed the people, Jesus made the disciples get into a boat and precede him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. After doing so, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When it was evening, he was there alone. Meanwhile, the boat, already a few miles offshore, was being tossed about by the waves, for the wind was against it. During the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. "It is a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. At once Jesus spoke to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter said to him in reply, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and caught Peter and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" After they got into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat did him homage, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. Oh, this is fascinating, right? Like there's so much going on. It's just mystery after mystery. Even the very first line, after he had fed the people, so this is carrying on from last week where Jesus fed the multitude. After he had fed the people, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side. What was going through the disciples' mind on this one? Because, okay, Father Michael, you and I have both been to the Sea of Galilee, I believe.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a big lake, basically, a really big lake. Towards the north side, I think, is modern-day Syria, or close to it anyway. And it's a sizable lake. I just looked it up on Wikipedia, so I'm sure it's a very reliable source. But the lake is about 13 kilometers wide, which is 8 miles wide. Mm-hmm. Or 53 kilometers circumference, about 33 miles circumference. This is not a small area, not a small body of water. And I had to be wondering what's going through the disciples' mind, because Jesus says, "Okay, you get in the boat and go ahead of me across this 13-kilometer body of water." And I wonder, like, okay, so would they be thinking, okay, what are you going to do then?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I saw some commentary on this point, actually, where they said, if you remember what happened at the very beginning of last week's gospel. So, because you said, right, this Sunday's gospel picks up right where last Sunday's gospel left off. And it said, well, Jesus just learned about the death of John the Baptist, and he tried to get away by himself.
Yeah.
But the people just kept coming. And it's almost as if Jesus is kind of making that second effort, like, okay, well, I tried to get away by myself. It didn't work. Now I really need to get away by myself, because he in a sense has to mourn the death of John.
Right.
So
that's pretty good. Because that's a lot of getting away by yourself. Because this is not a small thing that's happening. Like, assuming he doesn't have a boat, that's a long ways to walk. Like, half a circumference, you're going, 26 kilometers or so.
It's over a half marathon. So
yeah, it's a long ways. So so part of me just gets the sheer humanity of the whole thing, and just what was going through the disciples' minds. Like, yeah, very interesting. But then there's the kind of the meat of the story. They're in the middle of the night, and can you imagine just being on this boat and looking out and seeing him walking towards you? Now, in Canada, yes, people walk on water all the time. We call it winter time, but this is not winter time. And
they don't really get winter in Israel like we get winter in North America.
No. And so they're coming towards him. And then I think Peter makes probably one of the most interesting statements in the whole Bible. Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. I mean, it's just the humanity of it. Like, what is going on in their minds? You see a guy walking on the water towards you, and your first instinct is, okay, command me. I want to do that too. Kind of gives you a mind of, I think, Peter and his relationship with the Lord. It's quite special, quite amazing. And, the common commentary on this one is basically, as Peter keeps his eyes fixed on Jesus, does all right. When he starts to notice all the waves and everything around him, he begins to sink. And it reminds me of driver's ed. When do you guys get your driver's license typically in California?
It varies state by state, but almost generally it's 16.
Okay, so same for us then.
You can get your learner's permit usually at 15, but you get your license at 16.
Right, so same as us then. So typically then you would have driver's ed classes, maybe through the school, maybe through some other institution or something like that. My
mom taught me.
Like, we had them during high school here, and basically one of the things you get is the Saskatchewan Driver's Ed Handbook. And I still remember, like, the most important thing in that handbook, and what they try to just beat into your head over and over and over and over again, is look where you want to go. Look where you want to go, because quite often if you if somebody hits an obstacle, they were fixating on that obstacle, and you just naturally steer into that obstacle. You naturally will go where you are looking. Look where you want to go. Don't look at the obstacle. Look where you want to go, and to avoid whatever it is. And I think that very much applies to this gospel. Look where you want to go. Look to Jesus Christ. There's a lot of waves going on in our lives around us, a lot of waves in the world, and it's good to be aware of these things. But the ultimate place to be looking in the midst of the storm is to Jesus Christ. And I think that it's a simple lesson that Peter really shows us, his kind of impulsiveness in a way. It really kind of teaches us a very important lesson to it's very easy to let all the waves of life kind of drag us down, but to keep our eyes fixed on Jesus, that's the task that lays before us. It's as simple and as hard as that, really. But anyway, that's kind of what comes to my mind through these readings. It's just so fascinating. What was going through the other disciples' minds as they're on the boat watching this happen? I don't know. They're like, do we go after him? He's sinking. Like, what do we do?
I think that's the thing. I think questioning, right?
I think your audio just dropped out there, Father Michael.
Can you hear me now? I think it's just question after question after question.
Yeah, no. Aren't technical issues fun? That's exciting.
Let's do it like this. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. There you go. Audio through the iPad.
Only use the microphone. We'll just go with the camera, the computer audio. I think it's just question after question after question. And I also think what's interesting is the gospel says this is during the fourth watch of the night. So this is not early in the storm. This is not early in the night. It's much, much closer to sunrise at the end of the night than it is sunset. So they've been in this storm for a while, and they've been riding this. And I think if you've ever gone camping when it's stormy out, or had to spend time outside kind of in the rain, just how long that seems, right? If you're sitting in a tent and it's kind of raining out and you're just kind of huddled there against the cold, against the chill, against the wind, you're essentially just waiting for this storm to be over. And Jesus doesn't show up until the fourth watch of the night. And I was reading some of the commentary, and they were saying, well, each watch is about 3 hours. So they're into like hour 10 here of kind of riding out this storm of Jesus, waiting for a savior to come. They've been waiting for 10 hours, and Jesus finally does come. And so again, it leads up to all those questions again, like, are we just seeing a ghost? Is this just a figment of our imagination, or is this one of those things you hear about, like, oh, you see something right before you die, because they've been so afraid of death. But again, just all the questions that have to be running through the apostles' minds is crazy to think about.
Yeah. It's just like there's something so raw in the humanity of the story in the midst of something that is utterly spectacular, right? Walking on water. I mean, yeah. hard to even imagine what that must have been like.
Yeah, it just seems so crazy in a sense. And then the other thing I was kind of reading about is and this kind of led me to think about my experience actually scuba diving. So I don't know if have you ever scuba dived?
No.
So since when I was 16, I not only learned how to drive, I learned how to scuba dive, and so I've done some scuba diving, and there's always that contrast between the water and when you get up into the air. And I remember one time I went scuba diving and went down, and so I was down for about 45 minutes. And when I came up, the weather had changed drastically. And now it was windy, and the wind was kind of whipping. And it was causing the waves to kind of, much more waves at the top than than when we had gone in. And I remember that it seemed a lot more dangerous in the water than when I finally got out of the water back into the boat. Even though the waves were still kicking the boat up and down, and the wind was still coming, it just seemed like I was in much more danger. I was much more susceptible to what was going on when I was in the water. And I think it's John Chrysostom who makes the point here that Peter has two real dangerous things when he steps out in there. He goes, the immediate danger is the water, because he could drown. And then the secondary danger is the wind. But what is Peter fixated on? In the gospel, it says, but when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened. And so he's saying sometimes we don't even fixate on what is actually frightening, what is actually scary. We fixate on that secondary thing. And I think we can apply that sometimes in our lives. We get so frightened by the secondary thing, we forget what the immediate danger can be sometimes. And Chrysostom then went on to say, well, the immediate danger always is spiritual things, a spiritual attack or the spiritual realities. And we get so fixated on physical dangers and physical stuff that perhaps we miss the actual danger. I thought that was interesting. I'm not going to preach on it, but I just thought it was an interesting point.
That is very interesting. Maybe I'll preach on it. He says that was St. John Chrysostom.
I'd have to check that real quick.
Okay. All right. I mean, that is really quite a fascinating thing too. Cause I mean, yeah, that's a little detail in this version. He's scared of the wind.
Yeah. And then
you think walking on water might do it, but nope.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the what would be frightening? Like, I'm doing something that gravity tells me I shouldn't be able to do, right? I'm walking on water, but what am I frightened of? I'm frightened of the wind. And I think there's a great spiritual lesson there. Like, what are we doing? In some of the spiritual things, we're participating in the Eucharist in a way, which is such a great spiritual mystery. But yet sometimes we get fixated or focused on some other things, on kind of those secondary dangers. I think there's something to be said there as well.
Yeah, and you guys are still, are you guys fully locked down again from public mass?
Yeah, so we're not allowed to have indoor masses. So this weekend we'll have an outdoor mass. So we are set up in the parking lot, the schoolyard of our school, to have an outdoor mass. So we will try that for the first time this weekend. Here we're not so much worried about wind, or actually the wind is what we're not so much worried about cold or rain or waves, but it is the wind. That's one of the small details we have to worry about, because there are a lot of things that you put on the altar you don't want the wind picking up and taking away. So
quite. I have found that my iPhone actually can make for a good paperweight on a little missile sometimes, but.
Okay.
We had a comment from Jane here on Facebook. Reminds me of give us this day our daily bread, trusting that we will, by the end of it, receive what we need. In this case, it comes in that fourth watch of the night. That's pretty good.
There's something to that waiting and that trusting, I think.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, it's great. Obviously, I got to spend more time with these readings, but yeah, there's a lot here. It's fantastic. But you wanted to comment on, I think, the first reading, right? The
first reading. I said this is one of my absolute first favorite readings in all of Scripture, and it comes from 1 Kings. And in a sense, I think it has to do with that comment Jane made about the idea of waiting for the Lord. And so I'll go ahead and just read it. So it's a reading from the first book of Kings. At the mountain of God, Horeb, Elijah came to a cave where he took shelter.
Then the Lord said to him, "Go outside and stand on the mountain before the Lord. The Lord will be passing by." A strong and heavy wind was rending the mountains and crushing rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, there was a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. After the fire, there was a tiny whispering sound. When he heard this, Elijah hid his face in his cloak and went and stood at the entrance of the cave. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. So this is the New American Version that you were reading just now.
Mm-hmm. Did something strike you as different from the version you guys use?
Yeah, well, so instead of a tiny whispering sound, after the fire was a tiny whispering sound in the revision of the New Revised Standard Version.
Sure.
It's after the fire, a sound of sheer silence.
Ooh. I like that even more. To tell the truth.
Huh. Interesting. That's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And someone once told me a story, and I've told this story before in homilies on this, and in homilies and generally in trying to hear the Lord speak to us, or and what the guy was saying when he told the story is he was telling the story of going to buy speakers for his car. And he told the story that he goes into this shop, and they just have this wall full of speakers. There's maybe 20, 25 speakers on the wall. And next to the wall, there is a box of light switches, and there are 20, 25 light switches. And essentially he goes, well, what are these? And they say, well, each of these switches controls one of the speakers. So you can listen to the speaker you want to if you want to buy it, you want to test it out, you can hear what the speaker sounds like. And so he says, well, rather than turning one on at a time, he turned all 25 on. And he said, all of a sudden, 25 speakers started playing different kinds of music, right? And he just heard all this, essentially a cacophony of sound coming out. And so he said the first thing he did was kind of turn off the first half. And he said it was noticeable. It was noticeably more peaceful, noticeably more quiet. And he slowly began to turn them off more and more. And he said once it was down to 3 or 4 speakers, you could begin to kind of hear the difference between the speakers. But he said you really couldn't hear the speaker until you turned them all off but one. And he drew the great analogy that oftentimes, God is continuing to speak in this tiny whispering sound, just like this one speaker, right? All the other speakers were going, but you couldn't hear the one speaker that you wanted to hear until you turned off everything else in your life. And he said, if we want to hear this tiny whispering sound, or this tiny whispering sound of the voice of God in the silence, we have to, in a sense, turn off all the other speakers. We have to turn off the crushing rocks and the heavy wind, and turn off the earthquake and the fire, turn off all the noise in our life. And I often say, we have so many things in our life that make noise. They don't have to make a sound, but they make a lot of noise in our life. And so, do we have that mode or that opportunity in our life to just kind of be in the silence, because that's where God's going to speak.
Interesting. I mean, that's really cool. I was looking because Jane had asked on her Facebook again what the original Hebrew words are, and I'm not gonna, because I don't remember the Hebrew alphabet that well, but my interlinear Bible is translating it as a small whisper voice. So sound of sheer silence. I mean, it might depend on what source they're taking it from. But a small whisper voice, I mean, that kind of goes to what you're saying too, because unless you turn everything off, you're not going to hear a small whisper.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that kind of goes to what you're saying too, that particular translation. Although that's got me really curious now, it's probably different.
About what the actual Hebrew says. So
yeah, well, it's probably like different manuscripts and whatever. I don't know. But interesting. But that's a really great image though.
Yeah. And then actually something else I noticed about this reading, just as I was reading it aloud, is Elijah is promised that the Lord will come, right? Go outside and stand on the mountain before the Lord. The Lord will be passing by. It's not, well, we think he may be coming by. If you have a shot, go over here and give it a chance. It's the Lord is going to be passing by. Yeah. And so he goes through all these things with that confidence in that promise that he's been given. And what I find interesting then kind of tying it into the gospel is Jesus is actually the two kind of actions that he does are there are three actions, right? One, he kind of identifies himself. It is I. And then when Peter says, call to me, he says, come. And then when Peter cries out to him, the Lord saves him. The Lord, what I find, what interesting is, what does it say? At once Jesus spoke to them. Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught Peter. Lord, if it's you, command me come to the water. He said, come. The Lord responds immediately to their plea, to Peter's plea, or to their inquiry, or to the Lord crying out. So they may have waited till the fourth watch of the night, but that promise is fulfilled. And in a sense, that promise is fulfilled immediately. When they cry out, the Lord responds immediately.
Yeah. The response might not always be how we expect it, right? Because, think of like martyrs or whatever, right? Sometimes people end up dying for their faith. Take an extreme example.
Mm-hmm.
But we believe that there's something beyond what exists in the here and now too. So the Lord will respond. We might not always understand it in this life, perhaps. It might not be immediately how we would want it to be. But God's got the long view in mind. And then, we have some comments here coming up in Facebook again. So keep up your comments, people. We love to read these. Jane asks a very common question, very important question. How do you find the silence with the really loud children at all hours? Oh, how I long for silence. Maybe this is why more parents aren't made saints. I suspect there's probably an awful lot of saint parents that just haven't been canonized. But anyway.
Oh, I would agree wholly with that.
That's a very good point there.
I think you have to be intentional about it. If you're not intentional about finding that silence, it's not going to be found. And even not being married and not having kids, I have to be intentional about it, or I get to the end of the day and say, well, I had kind of no time for silence. And I would say you don't need long periods of time, right? It's again, I think it goes back to what I was talking about last week with, they had 5 loaves and 2 fish, which certainly wasn't enough in the face of the problem. But what they had, they offered it to the Lord. And so even if you say, well, I think I need a half hour or even 20 minutes or 10 minutes, if all you have is that 1 minute or that 2 minutes, give it to the Lord. Give the Lord that time of silence. And, I'm thinking of even just kind of very crass ways where we can find a minute or two of silence. I'll say these are things that I could probably do better in my own life. If I'm going to the restroom, I don't want to be crass here. I'm often on my phone. When I'm sitting on the toilet, I'm checking Facebook or checking through Twitter and scrolling. And I say, might this be a time of just silence? Not that it has to be, this is the best time of my prayer is when I'm, going to the restroom, but it's a time even for silence. I know that when I'm getting ready in the morning and when I'm in the shower, I often have music playing. Is there something where I could make that a time of silence? And I think even using the sound of the shower to enable me to kind of block out some of that other noise. It becomes, in a sense, kind of just white noise of falling water. Might that be a time of silence? But what I think is, no matter how busy we are and how much stuff we have running around, I think we can find 5 to 10 minutes a day to just kind of be in the silence. Even if we're so busy that we can't do it every day, try to make a regular habit twice a week, 3 times a week, even if it's just once a week, and say, like, once a week, I need this 10 minutes to just be in silence.
Right. I would invite, any parents who are in the chat, definitely let us know. Cause I'm not going to be the be all and end all of knowing how to deal with kids running around. I'm the oldest of 7, but it's different being an older brother than being a parent. So I definitely, share the wisdom in the chat as well. Because this is something where we can all help build each other up. Christy on YouTube posts, hide in your closet. Hey, whatever works, right? And Nancy is also, talks about the noise that exists, the noise of social media, the campaign. I assume that's the election campaign in the States.
I would
Maybe
assume
it's
so. Yeah.
the provincial election campaign in Saskatchewan that's coming up. I don't know, but probably not. The huge social
Have they announced who's
problems.
running for vice president in the Saskatchewan provincial election?
It's the leader's the premier, but yeah. The huge social problems, the pandemic, all causing great fear and anger, and a host of other things. We have to seek the quiet. Yeah, absolutely. So, and then Tish also makes an interesting comment. He is there in the noise.
Mm.
I mean, really, is there anywhere where God is not? So seeking Him where He is. Yeah. The noise of children. Yeah, he's definitely there in the noise of children. I've actually had a few profound spiritual experiences seeing kids at Mass who've usually managed to get loose from mom and dad are wanting to sink into the pew or chase. But hey, I've had a number of times where they'll charge at the sanctuary, run up to the altar. And I'm like, there's something to be said in being so eager to wanting to get towards the Lord. We can really see the presence of God working through that. So, I love these comments. People do keep them up. This is fantastic.
Yeah, thank you very much for those comments. And yeah, that's a great point. Even though in this instance in Kings, and I've found in my own life that if I want to best hear the voice of God, it requires silence. It's not to say that God is not present in the noise and in the busyness and in those moments of non-silence. And that's probably something I just have to do a better job in my life, is recognizing God's presence in those moments when I'm not trying to, I guess, actively seek Him, or and I guess this might come across weird, where I'm not trying to actively be passive to His presence.
Mm-hmm. I think I get what you mean. I think.
Yeah. Or I'm not trying to actively open myself up to receive Him, but when I just have those kind of busy times, and look, we all have those busy times. Can I recognize God in my life in those moments? And I think that actually is, if you know anything about St. Ignatius of Loyola, right, his examination of consciousness that he requires every Jesuit to do at the end of the day, is to go back over the day and try to, ask yourself that question: where was God present in my day today? And I think that can be another great tool, because the first time you do that, you may not be able to recognize where God was present in your day, but that repetition and getting better and better at it will allow us to recognize where God was present in our day. And the goal, of course, is that we'll be able to recognize His presence in the moment and not just later looking back on it in reflection. But, that becomes the ultimate goal, is to be able to recognize the way God is working in your life at this exact moment. And so part of it is, taking that time to look back reflectively and say, okay, well, where was God working in my life in this last day? In the busyness, in the messiness, where was God?
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big part of this particular reading, right? Is that you might expect the great God of the universe, the creator of heaven and earth, the God of the cosmos and everything, He's going to be present in the fire. He's going to be present in the earthquake. He's going to be present in the huge wind and the great and the powerful things. And where is He present? He's present in the small whispering voice or in the sheer silence, and where you might not expect, at least initially, right? So it's like what Pope Francis keeps saying, He's the God of surprise.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And actually, while you were saying that, I had kind of one final thought I may try to work into this homily.
One homily.
Exactly, but I think this is the same point, a different point of the same homily, though, is, like you were saying, we expect God in these huge, magnificent events. In my work with the high schoolers, we just had kind of a virtual retreat. And one of the activities we had was we had the students, go somewhere, go on the internet, look at pictures on your phone. Which one reminds you the most of God? Or which picture do you think kind of makes you think of God the most? And by far the most common type of picture that came back was, vast mountainscapes or lakes, or, these huge grandeur beautiful mountain scenes. And I admit I had a vision like that as well. I had a lake and, a mountain valley and stuff. And I think we often anticipate God being in those big things. We can easily see God in those big things. Can we see God in those small things, in the small everyday things? It's one of those things where it's easy to see God at work and being called to my vocation on the day of my ordination, right? But on those days when I'm busy and stressed and have a little bit of a headache, do I see the grace of God calling, me at work in that ordination? And I think for married couples, in those busy days when you've had a fight with your spouse and the kids just aren't listening to anything you say, do you see God working in your life and working in your marriage and working in that grace of the sacrament even then? Because sometimes it's in those difficult moments, and it may take waiting until the fourth watch to see where God comes in. But God, I think the overriding message is God is present. He will fulfill that promise to us, just like he filled it to Elijah. The Lord will pass by. The Lord will come.
And I think you just answered Nancy's question pretty much perfectly. What do you think is the biggest thread running through both of these readings? She just posted that question. So, because I know you can't see the questions from where you're at. So it's pretty great. Oh, this is fascinating stuff. I've loved this episode's actually kind of a little longer than we usually go. And again, you might even be hearing my dog barking away. And you know what? God's presence is there too.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's actually probably a homily there, and how much she can pick up other noises when she's wanting to. If I were to shake the treat box, she's here instantly, right? So
yeah.
Well, this is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to think about, and I encourage you, even if you're not able to watch it live or listen to it live, still comment on it. If you listen to it later, let us know your thoughts. We go back and check those comments, and who knows, if you put it in there before Saturday night, I may be able to work it into my own homily. So, help me do the work to make my homily better for you. So that's my request.
Exactly. And also just a huge shout out. She's commented a few times here, but Jane wrote a really nice article for CatholicMom.com about this podcast. So head over to CatholicMom.com and check them out. They do some great stuff over there. So do check that out, and thank you all for listening. Do head over to homilychat.com. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast. We'll have that posted, usually the same evening, sometimes the next morning after we record. Comment on our Facebook. I do try to post it to Instagram too. I'm not always on the ball with that. Take some time to transcode all the footage and everything, but thank you for listening. It's been awesome today seeing all of your comments. Can't be thankful enough for that, so thank you.
Yeah, and thanks to all those on the East Coast who stayed up to be with us, even though it's getting late on a work night here. I think it's pushing almost 11 o'clock on the East Coast. So if you're on the East Coast, thank you very much for staying up with us. Even if you're on the West Coast and it's only 7:45 here and you're still well within your regular time, thank you very much for joining us as well. So
take care.
thank you.
God bless.
Yeah, we'll see you next week.